Have you ever found yourself wondering why, no matter how much education changes, we still seem to be wrestling with the exact same basic questions?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
what's the real point of school? Or who should actually get educated?
Right. They're not new debates at all. They go way back thousands of years, really.
Exactly. It makes you think, why don't these big questions ever just, get settled?
Well, I think it's because every society in every single era has to constantly figure them out again for its own people, its own future.
Ah, okay.
The answers aren't fixed, right? What seemed right, say, 100 years ago
Yeah.
might look totally different today.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. It's not a problem to solve once, but more like an essential conversation we have to keep having.
Precisely.
And that's pretty much what we're doing today on the Deep Dive. We're really getting stuck into the philosophy of education. We've got a whole range of sources, ancient texts, modern research, the lot. Our mission really is to pull out the key insights, maybe find some surprising links, and see how these philosophical ideas have shaped and still challenge how we think about education, how we teach, and, importantly, why it matters to you.
Yeah, and the aim isn't to just give you definitive answers, not at all. It's more about sharpening your own thinking on these really fundamental questions every society has to grapple with.
Right, like joining a huge ongoing dialogue.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start there. These foundational questions, aims of learning, who gets to learn, they really do go back to Socrates, don't they? It's amazing how relevant those ancient debates still feel.
Absolutely. I mean, think about Socrates and Plato. Plato, especially in the Republic, uses Socrates to explore these really quite sensitive questions about the ideal state.
The utopian society idea.
Right. And he argued education shouldn't be the same for everyone. It should be tailored, based on individual abilities, not just a standard model.
Okay, but you might be sitting there thinking, how does some ancient Greek philosopher's idea about a perfect state connect to my classroom or my life today?
Well, that's a fair question. A contemporary philosopher, Jane Roland Martin, she makes a really important point. She says Plato, he largely ignored what she calls the reproductive tasks.
Like child rearing, caregiving.
Exactly. Things traditionally linked with women. He focused almost entirely on a male model of public life.
Ah, okay.
And even though Plato said sex shouldn't matter for choosing the state's guardians, his whole model kind of assumed male life was the default or superior. So that raises a big question for us, doesn't it? If education is truly for everyone, shouldn't it draw from the best of all human traditions, not just, half of them?
That's a really powerful point. This idea of a curriculum maybe implicitly favoring one gender's experience. Yeah, that's definitely still being debated today.
And sticking with the Greeks for a moment, if we think about moral development, Aristotle's ideas are still incredibly popular.
Right, his model of moral education.
He suggested training kids in good conduct. The idea was they learn virtue by, doing virtuous things. The saying, train up a child in the way he should go.
And when he is old, he will not depart from it.
Yeah. He thought young people weren't really ready for deep moral reasoning until their 20s. Before that, it was all about building good habits.
But what's really interesting about Aristotle, I think, is that it wasn't just about habits. Yes, character education, teaching obedience, honesty, that was big later on, 19th, early 20th century. But Aristotle seemed to get something deeper. He was closer to the Homeric Greeks, recognizing those really tough situations, the awful dilemmas, where good people face tragic choices.
Right. It wasn't black and white.
Exactly. It's not just about rules. It's a strong case for using things like biography and literature in moral education, isn't it? To understand the gray areas.
Absolutely. It makes you think about your own upbringing, doesn't it? Was it mostly about habits, or was there room for exploring those complex choices?
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, often called the philosopher of freedom.
Right. His big idea. Humans are born free and good, but society messes them up.
Yeah, corrupts them. He was looking for a way to live in a society that balanced self-reliance with compassion and, civic duty.
But here's the really fascinating, maybe even contradictory part. Despite being the philosopher of freedom, he actually pushed for very different kinds of education for boys and girls.
He justified it as natural, didn't he?
He did. His plan for boys, in his book Emile, was all about minimal rules, Learning out in the country, hands-on stuff, following interests. The teacher just subtly guides.
You can see the seeds of Dewey there.
Definitely. That child-centered approach.
And Rousseau also really stressed timing in education, the idea that kids are ready for certain things at certain times.
Which naturally leads to the question, how much should we adapt to a child's readiness versus how much should we direct their learning? It's a constant balancing act.
It is.
And Rousseau's ideas had a huge impact. People like Pestalozzi, Herbart, Froebel, they all built on his work. Pestalozzi, for example, he refined that idea of learning through the senses.
The object lesson thing.
Yeah, start with a real object, ask questions, maybe even take it apart. Herbart, too, he talked about the mind's apperceptive mass.
Which is basically
your existing knowledge, right? What you already know.
Mhm.
He argued new ideas connect best when linked to that existing base. It's a bit like Piaget's cognitive structure, just an earlier version.
And Herbart's lesson plan? Steps. Preparation, presentation, comparison. It's funny how you can still see echoes of that today.
It is surprisingly durable, isn't it?
Okay, so our deep dive continues with, well, a giant. John Dewey. His philosophy of education was really just his philosophy of life.
Mm-hmm. A thoroughgoing naturalist. He wasn't interested in the supernatural, or even what some philosophers call the transcendent. Focus on observable events, practical experience.
Right. And he came up with this model of thinking or problem solving that's still really influential.
Yeah, it starts not with an answer, but with like a nagging feeling that something's wrong, something's problematic.
Okay.
Then you form ideas, hypotheses, you test them out, see what happens, evaluate the results, and then reflect on the whole thing.
And he really pushed that learning has to build on what you already know. Teachers have to start where the students are.
Crucially, yes, but also anticipate where that learning could go. The logical way a scholar sees a subject isn't always the best way to teach it, pedagogically speaking.
So what does that mean for subjects like, say, history or geography? Dewey didn't want them taught as just lists of facts to memorize.
No, he wanted them presented as ways to explain why humans do things, to broaden connections, solve social problems. Why did people become traders? Why did that city grow up near those rivers?
He wanted a curriculum that felt unified, personally meaningful to the students.
Exactly, a personally unified curriculum.
But it wasn't all straightforward. Even his supporters admit there are ambiguities.
That's true. For instance, he didn't give a huge amount of direct attention to the massive issues of race, class, and gender in education.
Which seems like a significant gap now.
It does.
Yeah.
And his faith in science to solve problems. Well, some critics find it a bit utopian, especially today with all the power struggles and maybe a loss of faith in institutions.
Right. Okay, let's shift focus slightly. How do we even define teaching? What does that word actually mean?
This brings us into analytic philosophy. Mid-20th century, they really focused on analyzing educational language. Concepts like teaching, indoctrination, learning.
And Israel Scheffler was a key figure here.
He was. He proposed 3 criteria for teaching. First, the teacher has to intend for learning to happen, intentionality.
Okay.
Second, the methods they choose have to be reasonably likely to work, reasonableness.
Makes sense.
And third, the teacher has to act in a certain manner, one that respects the student's ability to reason. So not just shutting down questions like how or why.
Okay, so that leads to a really interesting question. Does teaching automatically mean learning happens?
Scheffler argued, no, not necessarily. You can teach without the student learning.
But, as our sources point out, if you keep using reasonable methods and nothing's clicking for the student, at what point does it stop being reasonable?
That's the tricky part. And the sources also suggest, when we realize a student isn't getting it, we tend to hedge our bets. We say, I'm trying to teach instead of I am teaching.
That's subtle but true.
And that manner criterion Scheffler talks about, it's really helpful for telling teaching apart from, say, indoctrination.
How so?
Well, indoctrination might have intention and maybe even seem to use reasonable strategies for getting a belief across. But it would fail on the manner. It actively blocks critical questions.
Right, it shuts down dissent.
Exactly.
But is just analyzing concepts like this enough? Susan Laird argues that this focus on rationality can miss the messiness of real classrooms.
The human element.
Yeah, students dealing with harassment, family problems, feeling invisible. She talks about real teaching, including things like building self-respect, learning to get along, finding joy. These aren't purely intellectual goals.
That really broadens the definition, doesn't it? Challenges where teaching even starts and stops.
It does. Then you have others, like Macmillan and Garrison, with this erotetic idea of teaching.
Right, the idea that teaching is about answering the questions students ought to be asking, given where they are intellectually.
It sounds like it could be really motivating, helping students out of confusion.
It could be. But there's a potential issue, isn't there? A student might not actually care about the questions they supposedly should be asking. They might not feel the predicament at all.
Yeah, there's a gap between the abstract intellectual problem and the student's actual lived reality.
Precisely. It highlights that tension.
Okay, let's broaden our scope now to continental philosophy. This is a big, diverse area. Existentialism, critical theory, postmodernism.
Yeah.
Lots influencing education philosophy.
It is vast. Let's start with existentialism. The famous phrase is, existence precedes essence.
Meaning,
You're not born with a fixed human nature. You create yourself. Through your plans, your reflections, your choices, your actions. It puts a huge emphasis on freedom and therefore responsibility.
so it's very individual-focused.
Yes, though religious existentialists like Kierkegaard or Buber also stress that individual choice, but often linked to a direct connection with God outside of rigid structures.
This links into identity, doesn't it? We can identify with labels, race, gender, nationality, but this philosophy suggests our freedom lets us go beyond just those categories.
Right, towards a more reflective personal identification, choosing who you are consciously.
And Martin Buber's idea of individual and relation seems key here.
Absolutely central. He argued, we don't figure out our essence alone. It's built in the struggle for meaning with others. We can't truly be ourselves without positive, real relationships.
And his famous line about education.
The relation in education is one of pure dialogue. Kids need that trust, that connection through genuine conversation to grow, especially when things are tough. Loneliness, darkness, and threat, as he put it.
That really resonates today, doesn't it? The focus on relationships and education.
It does. It keeps coming back. Now, moving to postmodernism,
Right.
it's maybe less a single philosophy, more a kind of mood or a set of questions.
Doubts about big universal truths.
Exactly. Doubts about the Enlightenment's search for absolute certainty. Postmodern thinkers might accept local truths, sports results, math rules, but they question objectivity in a bigger sense.
Because everything's influenced by perspective.
Right. Arguments, interpretations, even how we gather data, it's all shaped by our purpose, our viewpoint. Instead of objectivity, they might talk about intersubjectivity.
Like combining many perspectives to get closer to the truth.
Sort of, yeah. An aggregation of interpretations.
But this gets tricky. Thinkers like Habermas still believe in reason, in the force of the better argument.
But then, as Richard Bernstein points out, even philosophers can't always agree on what makes an argument better when looking at their own classic texts. If they can't agree, how can we expect wider agreement?
That's a fair point.
And it raises another concern. If the rules of argument tend to favor certain ways of speaking, what happens to the voices of others, people with different languages, different perspectives?
Derrida's plea to let others be.
Yes. Respect their difference. Don't try to force them into your own mold, which loops back in a way to that existentialist idea that essence isn't given, it's achieved.
Okay, this is fascinating. Let's talk about critical thinking. It's everywhere in education talk, from Socrates to the Common Core. But what is it, really? And how do we teach it?
Well, the Common Core links it to things like constructing arguments in math or analyzing documents in English. But, as our sources note, it often gives little attention to the contextual knowledge required.
Right, you need to know stuff to think critically about stuff.
Exactly, and that's the core debate. Is critical thinking a general skill, like formal logic, you can apply anywhere? Or does it have to be deeply tied to specific subjects?
Robert Ennis defined it pretty broadly. The correct assessing of statements, focusing on informal logic, observing, inferring, spotting bad reasoning.
And Richard Paul added that useful distinction between strong and weak critical thinking.
Weak being just spotting flaws in others' arguments.
Right. While strong critical thinking involves turning that lens on yourself, using dialogue to challenge your own biases, egocentric, sociocentric biases.
But Harvey Siegel raised a concern about Paul's approach, didn't he?
He did. Siegel worried that linking critical thinking too tightly to worldviews could lead to relativism. What if a worldview itself rejects critical thinking?
A potential paradox.
Though Paul and Siegel probably differ more on emphasis than fundamentals, but John McPeck, he went much further.
He was the one who said there's no such thing as general critical thinking.
Yes. He insisted it only exists within disciplines. You think critically as a historian or as a scientist. Critics naturally called this elitist exclusionary.
So thinking about this debate for a moment, how much does knowing formal logic actually help your everyday thinking? Does it make you a better critical thinker outside of logic class?
The sources suggest it probably helps a bit, but maybe not as much as people hope. And if you apply it too rigidly where it doesn't fit, it might even get in the way.
Okay, now a different angle. Can critical thinking be used for bad ends? General Martin raises this point.
Yeah, the idea that critical thinkers might become spectators, just analyzing arguments while injustice happens around them.
So they're skilled at critique, but not necessarily moved to act.
Potentially. Which brings us to a really crucial question. Does critical thinking need a moral base?
What do our sources say?
Charles S. Peirce, the pragmatist, argued ethics is foundational. Without a commitment to truth, science itself goes wrong. He thought critical thinking without a moral purpose is just a tool, potentially a dangerous one.
So the goal isn't just the best argument.
No. According to this view, the goal of strong critical thinking is to connect with others in a way that would make the world demonstrably better, less violent, less cruel. It ties back to that idea of letting the other be.
This has implications for teachers, doesn't it? Like the idea of pedagogical neutrality.
Right. Donald Vandenberg suggested teachers should respect student rationality by presenting all sides of an issue fairly.
But what about issues where the sides themselves, or the criteria for evaluating them, are in dispute, like evolution versus creationism?
Exactly. It gets complicated. And even more so, what about views that, frankly, on moral grounds, shouldn't be presented as equal options? Racism, sexism.
Yeah, you can't be neutral about everything.
Our sources are quite clear on that. There are views on which we cannot and should not be neutral. Where exactly that line falls? Well, that's a constant ethical and educational debate.
Okay, let's shift again, this time to epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How does this connect to education? Should everything we teach be strictly true? How reliable is research? What about knowledge and power?
Big questions. Traditionally, knowledge was often seen as justified true belief. Socrates was searching for that bedrock certainty, moving from shaky perceptions towards self-evident truths.
But many philosophers today have kind of given up on absolute final truth, haven't they?
Many have. They talk instead about things like Dewey's warranted assertions, beliefs we have good reason to hold for now, or Popper's idea of truth as a regulative ideal, something we aim for even if we never fully reach it.
And Popper's idea about science, falsification, not just confirmation.
Right. Science advances best by trying to prove theories wrong, not just piling up supporting evidence. It's about rigorous testing and being open to being wrong.
What seems really different now is this focus on the knower. Naturalistic epistemology, like Dewey's.
Exactly. Studying the process of knowing, how people actually come to know things. Piaget's work is a great example of genetic epistemology.
That's constructivism, right?
A form of it, yes. He blended rationalism and empiricism, arguing we don't just absorb knowledge, we actively construct it by interacting with the world using our innate mental abilities.
But then the postmodernists come in with a very different take.
They do. Some argue knowledge is so tangled up with social and political power structures that we have to focus on the sociology of knowledge. Who decides what counts as knowledge? Who benefits?
So knowledge isn't neutral, it's established by power.
That's the argument. And feminist standpoint epistemologists push this further. They argue that groups who experience oppression might actually have privilege to knowledge.
How so?
Because their direct experience gives them insights and authenticity that supposedly objective, detached accounts might miss. They contend traditional ways of defining knowledge have often served to maintain the privilege of white men.
Wow. Okay, this raises a really tough question for anyone teaching. When you're choosing what to teach, could there be values more important than just truth?
It forces you to think about it, certainly. And it connects to that ongoing debate about curriculum.
Structure of the disciplines versus significant problems.
Right. Should we organize around established, authoritative knowledge, or around big questions that force students to formulate their own inquiries, Dewey style?
And this applies to educational research, too. We hear about findings all the time. How do we judge them?
Well, philosophers of science like Lacto suggest looking at whole research programs, not just single studies. Is the program moving forward, generating new ideas, progressive, or just constantly fixing problems with old ones, degenerating?
Gives you a sense of its vitality.
Exactly. And Thomas Kuhn's idea of paradigm shifts.
Where science changes through revolutions, not just steady building.
Yes. And he argued different paradigms can be incommensurable. They operate with different assumptions, different languages, making direct comparison or criticism really hard.
So how does that apply to the fights we see in education research? Qualitative versus quantitative.
Well, one side might ask if the other is even science, while the other says the scientific model just doesn't capture the complexity. Kuhn's idea suggests maybe they are operating in different worlds.
But does that mean they can't talk to each other at all?
Not necessarily. Our sources suggest maybe incommensurability here means they need to step outside their narrow frames and talk about bigger things. Purposes, uses, meanings, significance in the real world.
A broader conversation.
A broader conversation. And finally, there's this policy push for randomized controlled trials, the gold standard for medicine.
But education is way more complex than drug trials, isn't it?
Absolutely. Our sources point out the problems. People react differently. Education has multiple goals. Teacher-student relationships matter hugely. There are ethical issues with random assignment.
And it misses the point that scientific research is just one kind of educational research.
Exactly. Maybe other kinds aim for different things, like inducing a multiplicity of meanings and, in rare cases, even wisdom, not just measurable outcomes.
Okay, let's delve into ethics and moral education now. This feels really central.
It is. And interestingly, Aristotle's virtue ethics focusing on character, context, balance is making a comeback. People are interested again in things like friendship, managing appetites, dealing with good and bad fortune.
But the Enlightenment brought a big shift, didn't it? With Kant.
A huge shift. Kant's deontological ethics focus on duty, on reason. Humans use reason to make universal laws for themselves. Do not steal, not because of consequences, but because it's irrational to will stealing as a universal law.
So the individual as a reasoning machine is key. Emphasis on the right, the procedure over the good, the outcome or context.
Right, but it's often seen as a bit, well, grim, lots of don'ts, fewer positive duties like helping others.
And utilitarianism offers a stark contrast.
Completely. Utilitarianism puts the good, usually happiness or well-being, first. Aim for the greatest good for the greatest number.
Which leads to those classic dilemmas.
Yes.
Sacrifice one for the many.
Exactly. Those grisly decisions Kantians try to avoid. Though utilitarians might say Kantians let preventable suffering happen by sticking too rigidly to rules.
So going back to character education, rooted in Aristotle, teaching virtues, using role models, how well does it actually work?
The evidence is pretty mixed, honestly. Some studies suggest kids behave well when the authority figure is watching, but maybe not otherwise. And critics worry about relying too much on tradition and authority, especially in diverse societies. Could it lead to rigid, unthinking conformity? They even raise the disturbing example of the members of the Nazi high command, highly disciplined yet.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought. And it begs the question, do we even agree on which values to transmit?
That's a major challenge. Then there's Kohlberg's model cognitive developmentalism.
The stages of moral reasoning, pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional, ending with universal justice.
Right. But Carol Gilligan famously critiqued it.
Because he only studied boys.
Primarily, yes. And she found women often spoke in a different voice, emphasizing care, relationships, responsibility to others, not just abstract justice principles.
Which highlights things Kohlberg's model tended to ignore, like feelings, the quality of connections.
Exactly. And it raises big questions about universality. If different groups reason differently, can one model really apply to everyone?
And, crucially, does higher moral reasoning actually lead to better moral behavior?
That link is far from guaranteed. Again, the source mentions the Nazi leaders, highly educated, capable of complex reasoning, yet they committed horrific atrocities. Knowing the good doesn't automatically mean doing the good.
Which suggests moral education can't just be about thinking. It has to involve feeling, practice, relationships.
Precisely. It has to be more holistic.
Okay, bringing in social and political philosophy, there's this ongoing debate between liberalism and communitarianism.
Right. Liberalism, think Rawls, emphasizing individual liberty, equality, fairness. Communitarianism, emphasizing community, shared values, traditions.
Rawls' original position, thought experiment, is famous.
Yeah. Imagine designing society from behind a veil of ignorance. You don't know who you'll be, rich, poor, talented, disabled, so you create rules that protect everyone, especially the worst off.
But critics say it's too abstract, right? Hyper-rational, not real people.
That's the common criticism. It's detached from actual lived experience and community ties.
How does Dewey fit in here? He wasn't purely individualist or traditionalist.
No, his was more a democratic communitarianism. Community isn't fixed. It's something we're always building together through open discussion, inquiry, not just passing down traditions via a set curriculum.
This connects directly to justice and equality in schools. Kozol's savage inequalities in funding.
Stark differences. Rawls's theory would likely demand fixing many of those resource gaps, but exactly how is still open to debate.
And policy often focuses narrowly on test scores, doesn't it? Not things like self-worth, which Rawls actually thought was important.
Right. Resources get tied to measurable learning outcomes, overlooking deeper educational goals.
And what about inequality in just basic relationships? That rarely comes up in school reform talks.
It's a huge blind spot. Remember Uri Bronfenbrenner? He stressed the need for the enduring irrational involvement of one or more adults with a child.
Somebody has to be crazy about that kid.
Exactly. And Buber's pure dialogue. It means policymakers need to value how teachers actually connect with students as individuals, not just deliver content.
So what about curriculum equality? Should everyone learn the exact same things? Adler's Padea proposal argued for that.
Yes, a uniform curriculum for all. But critics argue that can actually widen gaps, not close them.
How?
By potentially boring or frustrating kids whose talents lie elsewhere, and by narrowing the curriculum just to what's easily tested, it can end up impoverishing education and cheating many students.
Because treating everyone the same isn't always the same in effect.
Precisely. We need a curriculum that acknowledges different backgrounds, different strengths. It's complex, equal opportunity, and equal outcomes are tangled together.
Maybe shifting from accountability to responsibility helps.
Our sources suggest so. Accountability often means pleasing those higher-ups. Responsibility means focusing on what's truly best for the students in front of you.
Which leads back to that earlier point. Should we ditch important goals like aesthetic appreciation or caring just because they're hard to test?
It's a critical question about what we truly value in education.
Okay, our final section. Multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism. Broadening horizons.
Two important concepts. With multiculturalism, most agree it should fight racism and teach about diverse cultures. But there's opposition.
Fears about undermining Western heritage or dividing the country.
Exactly. Arthur Schlesinger worried it rejected the melting pot ideal, the unifying vision.
But Jane Addams showed way back that you could encourage assimilation and cultural pride simultaneously, preserve skills, foster belonging.
A more nuanced approach, but controversies persist. Remember the Mako's social studies program?
Vaguely. Mid-century. Aimed at critical thinking about cultures.
Yes, but it got attacked in Congress. Accused of promoting cultural relativism, secular humanism. Government funding for innovative curricula basically dried up after that.
Which raises the question, is it the public school's job to encourage critiquing the nation? Or understanding different religions, even if it causes friction?
Difficult territory. And that leads into cosmopolitanism.
Seeing the whole world as your community. Global citizenship.
Right. Martha Nussbaum argues it helps us learn about ourselves, solve global problems, recognize moral duties beyond borders.
But Benjamin Barber saw it as potentially thin, lacking the emotional pull of patriotism.
Yeah, he worried it couldn't compete with national feeling. And he saw a risk of confusing it with American exceptionalism, the city on the hill idea.
So the educator's dilemma, how to foster both local belonging and global concern without indoctrinating. Are they truly opposites?
A key tension to navigate.
Okay, let's wrap up by revisiting feminist philosophy, especially the ethic of care. It seems like a thread running through many of these discussions.
It really does offer a powerful lens. Feminist critiques point out how even supposedly liberating philosophies often kept male perspectives central, reducing the whole person to just a thinking mind, an epistemological subject.
And standpoint theory suggests oppressed groups have unique insights. Privileged knowledge.
Yes, knowledge that's epistemically richer because it comes from lived experience of marginalization, emphasizing who is speaking and their experience.
But the ethic of care takes a different starting point than abstract justice, doesn't it?
Completely different. It doesn't start with principles, it starts with relationships. It challenges that sharp I-sought divide. The feeling I ought to help arises directly from seeing someone in need, from our own experience of natural caring.
Because we remember being cared for ourselves.
That's the idea. It's grounded in lived reality. Ethical thinking happens in caring interactions, asking, what does this person need right now? Not applying abstract rules in isolation.
So no fixed recipes, just guiding questions.
Exactly. The only universals are our shared human condition. Birth, death, needs, and that deep longing to be cared for.
How does this translate directly into education?
It emphasizes genuine dialogue. Teachers need to receive students openly, letting the student's perspective shape the interaction. It's about fostering growth, inviting them into the immortal conversation, not forcing them.
And practice matters too.
Hugely. Practicing care changes students' mentality. Think about cooperative learning. The explicit goal should be helping each other understand, share, support, not just getting the right answer.
And that idea of confirmation, affirming the best in others.
Yes, central to Buber and care ethics. It means really knowing the other person, assuming the best possible motive that fits reality, and helping them see their own potential, their better self.
It's about letting the other be, but not just ignoring them.
Right. Respecting their otherness, their own ideal, even when you disagree or need to guide them, and it requires looking inward to examining our own biases and reactions.
So circling back to critical thinking, can it be guided by this ethic of care?
Absolutely. It fosters interpersonal reasoning, thinking with others, characterized by care, not aiming to win or defeat them. It accepts our moral interdependence.
Meaning we're all connected.
Yes. As teachers, we depend on our students just as they depend on us. It's a reciprocal relationship.
So as we finish this deep dive, here's something to think about. If knowledge isn't just found but actively constructed, and if teaching is really about building relationships and confirming the best in people, how might putting care at the center change not just what we teach, but how we think about the whole purpose of education and building a more humane world?